types of ratios. There are basically two types of ratios: part-to-part ratio and part-to-whole ratio. And this can be written as part-to-part, and this can be written as part-to-whole. Like ratio, we have two types of proportion: direct proportion and inverse proportion. And for the proportion, this for another video. To understand part-to-part and part-to-whole ratio, consider this circle splitted into 4 equal parts. For the part-to-part, this is 1:3, 1:3, or 1:3. Both are the same thing. And for part-to-whole, I will now consider the part that was shaded with respect to the whole division, which is 1:4, or we can write it in this form. For part-to-part, we are considering the part that was shaded and the part that was remaining in the circle. We are not counting all the division, but for part-to-whole, we always consider the entire division. This is a very important concept in ratio. Next, consider this example. This circle is splitted into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For part-to-part, 5 will never be mentioned. Part-to-part, we consider the shaded part, which is 2, and it will consider the remaining parts that were not shaded, which is 1, 2, 3. This is 2:3. However, for part-to-whole, it must consider the 5 at the denominator, and at the numerator, 2 parts were shaded. And here we are going to have the same 2:5. Also, part-to-whole could consider the remaining unshaded portion, which is 3:5, or we can represent it in this form. This and this are simply part-to-whole. And for the previous example, this can also be 3:4, because this is part-to-whole, which can also be written as this in ratio. And for part-to-part, if we are considering this remaining portion first, we can have it as 3:1. But if we are considering the shaded portion first, we're going to have it as 1:3. Likewise, in this example, if we're going to consider this unshaded portion first, we're going to have 3:, the remaining shaded portion is 2. Which comes first depends on your first consideration. For the complete video course on this subject, click the link in the description or in the pinned comment section. Next, in this example, we have 3 shaded portions among 8 parts. If we're going to consider the shaded portion first, then we're going to have 3:, the remaining portion not shaded is 5. This is same as 3:5. But if we're going to consider the unshaded portion first, it's going to be 5:, the shaded portion is 3. We can write this as 5:3. This is part to part. Remember, we have 8 division. For part to part, the 8 will never be mentioned. However, for part to whole, the 8 must be mentioned. If we are considering the shaded portion first, we are going to have the number of the shaded portion divided by the total number of the division, which is same as 3 to ratio 8. Likewise, if we are going to consider the unshaded portion of the division, we are going to have 5 to ratio 8, which is same as 5 to ratio 8. 8 was mentioned because we are considering part to whole. You see that in part to part, they compare just each other. The shaded portion and the unshaded portion are being compared. But in part to whole, the shaded portion compared to the whole division is compared. Understanding this is one of the secrets of solving ratios. Almost all the questions given to you in the exam must either be part to part or part to ratio. If you consider this, you observe that this is part to part ratio because we have 2 to the ratio of 3. These 2 oranges is being compared to these 3 apples. However, we have a total of 5 fruits, but 5 is not mentioned in this comparison. This type of ratio is part to part. If you consider this division, 5 is at the denominator, showing clearly that this is part to whole. This 3 to ratio 5 is representing the shaded portion, and this unshaded portion, we can also have it as 2 to ratio 5. And for this division, this is 1 to ratio 2. We can also have this as 1 to ratio 2, which can also be written as this. And this can also be written as this. If you consider this division, the 8 at the denominator is part to whole, and this unshaded portion can also be written as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is 5 to ratio 8. Understanding part to part and part to whole is one of the best skills you can have when solving ratio. Next, in this example, if I'm considering this boy first, I will now say boy to ratio girls. We have only one boy here. It's going to be 1, and here we have 3 girls. This comparison is part to part. We are not considering the whole entire class. And if I'm considering only the girls, which is the girls to ratio the boys, here I have 3 girls, and here I got only 1 boy. This is part to part ratio, and this is part to part ratio. I have not considered the entire class. If I'm going to consider this boy in this whole class, it's going to be 1 to ratio 4. This time around, I'm counting everybody. This is for the boy. But if I'm going to consider the girls in this class, then I will have 3 to ratio 4, which is for the girls. You will see when we begin to take some exam questions, the concept of this part to part and part to whole will be the basic principles behind solving the problems. Next, if you consider this 5 girls to 15 boys ratio, is it a part to part ratio or is it a part to whole ratio? I will give you a few seconds to figure it out. It is a part to part ratio because the entire class is made up of 20 pupils. But in this ratio, 20 is not mentioned. That means 5 to ratio 15 is a part to part ratio. For part to whole, the girls will be 5 to ratio 20, which is 1 to ratio 4. While for the boys, the part to whole for the boys will be 15 to ratio 20, which is 3 to ratio 4. 5 here is 3 and 5 here is 4. This is when we are considering part to whole. For any given exam question, always check if it is part to part or if it is part to whole. This is one of the first steps you should remember in every exam question under ratio. Next, looking at this example, is it part to part or is it part to whole? It is part to part because 6 was not mentioned here. The ratio of the boys to the girls is 4 to ratio 2. 2 here is 1 and 2 here is 2. We can simplify it further to be 2 to ratio 1. If we have girls to ratio boys, then this will be 2 to ratio 4, which is 1 to ratio 2. I believe this was helpful. If you find this video helpful, please click the like button. Also, subscribe for more videos like this. I will see you in the next video.